I found this morning's session very stimulating, and starting out with Christian's excellent articulation of the fundamental questions we should face, articulated the challenge beautifully. And then I found that Rupert, eloquent presentation of phenomena that requires entering into some morphic fields, and to understand that morphic means holistic is vital. And I think that was followed by Pim's very brilliant articulation in terms of near-death, this is going near-death and what that means. And of course, your presentation in terms of historical phenomena across cultures and worlds. And when you look at all of these things together, I wanted to just very briefly pick up on the questions that Christian posed for us in the light of what I was suggesting yesterday as a language to get to information and the Akashic field. And what I was suggesting last night, again, you remember, was to see that information, the space of information in the science of logic, speaking from the science of logic and deep ontology, which is a global science, east and west, north and south. Logic is the science of consciousness, language, and thought. And as I mentioned last night, this science, if you could tap and decode the space of thought, you would have the code for all information. Because the thinking space, and this is in Greek philosophy and logic, which is the founding of logic science in European tradition, to think is to predicate. This is the thinking space, and the thinker is usually not even seen. It's out of the picture, and usually we spend our entire cultural lives in these places. Our cultures are encoded in certain forms of grammars, of predication, and all of the categories that we use. Categoria means predicate, and as you know, all through history, the great quest of the philosophers has been to tap the fundamental grammar of this space. And if we could decode that, we would have the DNA for all consciousness and for all reality, because this is the place that we make all of our phenomena. This is the screen of consciousness in which our world appears to us. And Kant, for example, saw this is the place of phenomena, and that space and time are brought by the structures of the perceiver thinker. And there's always been an attempt to explain the fundamental categories: space and time, and cause and substance, the building blocks of our world that go into the space of predication. And if we understood the grammar of thought, how do we predicate? How do we join subjects and predicates in our thought space to make our world? What makes sense in one world does not make sense in another. In one language, we can predicate that stones are thinking. You go to a village in Africa, or you go to a village in India, and you find native speakers saying, this is Shiva, this is the stone spirit. My anthropologist friend said, who's trained in the European tradition, who was next door to me in my college, Haverford, said, Ashok, how do I as a scientist deal with these native speakers who act as if the stone is alive in spirit, when I know as a scientist that that is superstitious? Stones are dead. And I point out to him that you're speaking a particular grammar. The grammar that we use shapes a lens that shapes our entire world. So ontology and logic come together as a fundamental science of the structure of reality. And Aristotle, for example, knew if we had the grammar of predication, we have the code of our world, a worldview. And so the charge from the very birth of philosophy was to understand the categories and how they combine. If you start to combine most terms from our language, if our language is made up of these pieces of information, subjects and predicates, this is the space of information, all through history. Information is the formation of thoughts. So if I say chalk is white, well, that sentence is true if it refers to something in the world, and chalk is white, grass is green, rain is falling. It's all predication. They're formed in sentences, in different languages. Il pleut, es regnet, it is raining. Different sentences, but the same fact. And so the correspondence between sentences and the word is information. So the question is now that since this has been the space of our cultural worlds, all of them, There have been different memes or structures in this space that have been proposed all through history. All history has been the battle to find different grammars of connecting the items to make sense of our meaning, as Christian rightly pointed out. Information and meaning go together, and it's encoded in the deep structure of the world. So that if you try then to just combine terms at random from our language, you'll see very clearly that there are laws of thought. If I say 7 is blue, well, 7 is not a physical thing. It's not in space and time, so you can't take color. It's a category mistake. It's not just false to say 7 is blue. It's nonsense. You have to make sense to qualify to be true or false. If I say 7 is odd, or 7 is even, then that is false, but it makes sense. So when you begin to put terms together, it's very clear that there's a grammar that I speak, allowing me to put items together in information structure that gives me my world. And when you cross different worlds, you get different structures. So that it's known that if your fundamental category, so here you might say, philosophers have known that if my language in space consists of all of the fundamental subjects and predicates put together, is there a structure to my grammar, to my world? Yes. And Plato was already conjecturing that it will have some kind of a pyramid structure of information of how to put our world together that we map when we learn in our culture, the grammar. So if I'm speaking a grammar, imagine if you take all of the fundamental categories and subjects and map them, you will get a pyramid of some kind of information in which the basic categories, let's use capital letters here and small letters here, will map your world of the categories and the kinds of things that make up your world. So that on this side you might have space, extension, and time. And so you have color, figure, texture, motion, and then you have this stone here. And if consciousness is on this side, different from extension, this is what Descartes discovered, that consciousness is a different category located differently than the physical space and time, and all the other subcategories like color, figure, texture, motion that goes into encoding a stone or a physical object. But if I say of mathematics, which is over here and not in physical space, and here's mathematics and number theory, 7 is blue, I'm breaking the laws of my grammar. I have a category mistake. Nonsense. And so it was known that if the soul is something that's purely conscious and not in space and time, and the body is something in physical space and time, then I not only have a problem, I am a problem. Because I say I am sitting in the chair and thinking of Vienna. I'm a category mistake. How can one thing be at the same time body and consciousness? Descartes understood that, so he split the self to save the self. You have to split the two natures of soul and body, and you have the Cartesian dualism. It's a grammar problem, and it would save the grammar. And Socrates exactly saw that in the prison when he was about to die and drink the hemlock, and his disciples are all in despair. He was saying, don't you understand immortality? That the body is of a different nature than the soul. But you can cut the body and deteriorate the body, but the soul is not in space and time, and therefore it's not subject to temporality, and it's not subject to decay. It's not that kind of thing. So ontology investigates the nature of things according to the category structure and information in it. And all of history has been a battleground of understanding different worlds for the space, so that idealism would suggest that in the beginning is spirit, that's the highest uniting category, and everything in that word is going to be under the nature of spirit. If spirit is the apex, uniting all of the world, then you have idealism. So the biblical ontology is in the beginning spirit. And all, let there be light, so matter comes out of spirit. So that when extension or matter in space and time comes out of spirit, you have one cosmology. But then in materialism it says, no, extension is, or energy is primary, the Big Bang, and later comes consciousness. Consciousness comes out of matter. So you give a scenario in this worldview that predicates differently and gives a different universe, a cosmogram. But we don't really even have these codes to realize that when you're speaking the biblical ontology, and Hegel was doing this when he saw Geist was all history, and Marx was reversing it when he said, no, it's material forces, a production economy. He was switching grammars. So all of history of European thought, for example, has been a battleground of alternative grammars, all the way from Hume and Spinoza, Descartes, all the way through the proposing philosophers are grammarians, information, structure, the deep information, that shapes the world. But what I was suggesting yesterday is that until we realize that this ego technology of predication and the way it plays out, which we usually are not educated in, there's an alternative that's been presented for eons, and I think that Ervin Laszlo is another eloquent voice at the frontier of pushing this project further, that the Tao, Om, Shunyata, that's 0-point energy. Buddha saw that. It's 0 point, Shunyata, space, that I used this symbolism. So what I was proposing last night very briefly, and I'd like to pick up on that and get back to to the Christian's questions, because I want to show that if we understood information here, the deep challenges that were right here articulated, what is the connection between information and meaning? What is the connection between information and consciousness? What's the relationship between consciousness and language? Begins to be solved in a profound way by going into this lens that I use a double bracket. It's a non-dual integral space. And I use the word logos, from the Greek meaning the word, mind, consciousness. It's a rich word. It's a word because it's a primal word. It has all the categories in it already. This is what Kant could not show in his transcendental deduction of the categories, because he was trying to do that here. But philosophers have known that you have to go out of the ego technology of breaking down information this way to the source of the information, into the informational primal field. The Akashic field is one name for it, which is the unified field. And if we make this inversion, it's a profound shift to go from this language, which I use single brackets here. So any word spoken in this space, mark in single brackets, just to bring it out into the open that I'm ego technology, because it means something here. And if we try to place the Akashic field here, if we try to ask the questions, a question is a predication. A question is a predication with an interrogative. So our questions, if they're formulated here, are using concepts in this space and categories, and it's all been here. So if I use the word information, I'm sorry this is so sloppy. I'm going to switch a bit. Before I turn the page, because I want to really focus on this, is that when we see that all of these traditions have been naming this fundamental field, whether it's Yahweh, the infinite spirit, or Allah, the infinite, or even the fundamental cosmological force of energy, even if energy is taken to be the fundamental unifying principle, they all recognize that it's boundless and infinite. That's been a consensus across all borders. The fundamental name is infinite. If it's infinite, it must be one. That's a fundamental axiom. Because if it's more than one, it's not. It becomes finitized by the other. So there cannot be an other to it. And once you realize its unity, then it's all-encompassing. And we haven't even had a name for this fundamental, and I think there's a profound logic here that now is beginning to come out very powerfully in these reflections. And that's really what I want, because when Buddha saw this, Buddha's whole awakening was to say, if you stay here and get stuck there, in this technology of mind, it's a place of suffering. And the pathway to liberation is to overcome the egocentric pattern, which is a vice and an addiction, and to move into the integral pattern. Now that's what I want to just suggest. What is that? That's a profound shift from dualistic speaking and fragmentary speaking to non-dualistic, integral, holistic. And I think when we use our language to try and articulate our project, if we're using it in the old space, we're doomed. If we say, I want a theory of everything, well, theories have been conceptual structures, or theoretical structures formulated in this space. The technology of ego logic is not appropriate to articulate a theoretical space for everything. It's not a matter of a theory of everything. It's a matter of opening a lens in which the cosmology of the world unfolds. And that's not a lens that people cook up. It is one that is presented and opened by the Logos. The Logos is the infinite field. It is very simple. This is a bit of consensus. It's going to be a field of interactivity, dynamic co-arising. You cannot make it static. You cannot impose and import these constructs that freeze and fragment and isolate and separate into this field. So if you use the word information here, which has dominated our cultures, it's very different than information here. When Descartes courageously moved out of this and broke the ego barrier in his meditations, I believe he went into the I am. That was a turning point in his meditations. He saw that any predication could be doubted because he was separated from the information. Even 2 + 2 = 4. He said, what if there's a demon that tricks me into believing that is true, that predication is true? It could be false. If there's a tricking Maya disturbing and disrupting this. And this has been seen with people, that when the thinker is separated from losing this. When the thinker is separated from the thought, there is always a possibility of error and distortion. But when Descartes crossed into the he was frightened. Because having left the old structures of the mind and the body, he dropped all of that. He was out of body. This is the place of space. You can go out of space, out of time, out of mind, body. These are all category constructs. So when the mind gets clear and deconstructs that, you enter into the open space of I am, beyond the categories. So many of us today say you can go into phenomena beyond space and time, near-death experiences, so that's exactly right, to go into the space of the consciousness. But when you go into the I am, something strange happens to the whole turning. There's an inversion in language, because now you realize, whereas before, the word I was a pronoun that refers to something else, namely you, the I itself is the origin of language as one with the word. It encodes all the categories already. When you say I am in a non-dualistic integral voice of information, you realize that you already encode all the information within yourself. All the categories are already there. And Descartes began to see that. When he saw the I am, he was frightened. He said, I am, but what am I? I know not. He was in the 0 point. He was in the empty place of fullness. And he began to overflow. And he said, well, what am I? I'm thinking. A new kind of thinking. Well, what is that? That is his being. Thinking is being. That's an equation, an axiom. You cannot separate thought from being. That's a myth that was always separated here. And immediately, upon the I am, he says, well, what else is there? And he realizes immediately that there must be an other to him, because he's already questioning, and therefore he must be finite in some way. So there's an other, and that is the infinite thou, God. So his proof of God existing as the first premise, it wasn't just the I am, but it was God is, Logos is. The ultimate deduction is to realize that you cannot get outside of Logos, the infinite force. That was his meditation. And once he saw that God is, then he could rebuild knowledge in the 4th meditation. Because as long as he's embraced by the light of Logos, of reason, and he stays in that light and doesn't fall into the hubris of ego thinking, as he said in the 4th meditation, I will stay in the light and I will find lucidity and knowledge begin. And he found the knowledge event. And from that he said, but can I find the world? Can I find the body? Because he left his body. And he was just consciousness. And the amazing meditation in the 5th meditation is bodies exist. He went from thinking, time was there, because he says, if I stop thinking, I will cease to be. So there was radical time. He was time. It's not that he was in time, he was time. It was not that he had predicates of being, he was being. That was the point. That's why he could not be deceived. To say I am is the ultimate deep speaking of this Logos.
in which you are inseparable from what you speak. You are your speaking. And so you begin to realize that the logosphere, as I would call it, the Akashic field, is information. It's the word, the deep word, the infinite word, that's filled with being, time, and space, and therefore body. So matter, as Christian was pointing out rightly, is already encoded in consciousness. You can't do that in the old space of materialism versus idealism, or even panpsychism. All of those have been tried and have not gone deep enough to see. If we understood one point in this field, it must be I use the word hologistic rather than hologram. Because if you talk holistic talk here, it breaks down. The technology can't accommodate it. The technology of non-dual thinking, holistic thinking, is necessary to do holistic narration. And what you begin to see across borders, and this has been confirmed by centuries of research across tradition, this is all Buddhist thought, all things co-arise and are interconnected. You have non-locality. The infinite field, if you break a piece of it off, you have the infinite. You can't break it down. So every point in this field, every point of time is filled with space. And where you have space, you have body. So you can never break consciousness from body and get the mind-body problem that we got here. So I'm just trying to give a sense of the radical shift into this way of thinking. That Zen thought, for example, you enter the moment, the time. It's all about entering into deep time, which logos time, unlike ego time, is unbroken, and you can never sever the past and the future. All moments meet. And not only that, all categories meet. So when Einstein saw the space-time continuum, that was a tip of the iceberg, because all the categories meet in every point. And Descartes was beginning to see that in the I, we are language. We are information in this deeper sense. Logos is information. It's the infinite word. Word encodes information. It's infinite consciousness. So I think the I is ICE, the information, consciousness, energy. So, and in the Hindu grammar, it's known that Brahman, which is a name for this, Brahman, is not only Purusha, consciousness, it's Prakriti, matter. So there's a unified field in which matter and consciousness are inseparable. And you have a primary mind matter. So you cannot separate mind matter, space-time, cause, substance. So causation becomes integral and holistic and interconnected in every way. And all of these points begin to follow. So I just want to suggest then that the questions that were asked, if we approach it here in this field, then we find exactly that point, that information, deep information, is profoundly meaningful. It is logosful. We are not using language, we are script. We are the script. And Heidegger saw that in his later work when he said, language is the house of being, and that we're meditative beings, and our future turns on that. He was beginning to get that. Or when Derrida suggested we're always in the text. There is no on the text. There's no outside of the text. We are the text. These points are beginning to come out. So I would just, I guess the main point I'm making for a conversation, I hope that as we speak, that we realize that it is not only certain paranormal phenomena, such as near-death experience, or other aspects of telepathy. Those stretch the boundaries here and break out of the box, no doubt about it. We have to go here. But I'm suggesting every phenomenon is paranormal. Every phenomenon understood in this lens. If I take this pen here, this simple piece of plastic, and I place it here, the pen becomes a miraculous event of reflecting the entire field of logos. This mundane pen. Every experience, and that's what Zen is. Zen recognizes that when we're in this point, every moment is sacred and every moment is holographic and interactive in that sense, and information filled. So I just wanted to make that.
Loud enough like this? Yes. Okay. Very simple question. Trying certainly not consciousness about one in diversity. We have that terrible conflict of diversity and knowledge of oneness, wherever it exists, in practical political world. And that is not only harmful, but it's deadly. And I just wonder simply how we could bring the knowledge which is present in this room, and in many more people who have dared into venturing in mystical experiences, I guess, or in scientific or other kind of work, bringing the same kind of same recognitions or consciousness, how can we bring this into a broader scale to be accepted so that by more people and put into a concrete reality of peaceful living in co-togetherness, that in if you know what I mean, as one in diversity which is absolutely no contradiction. Beautiful diversity in at the same time total oneness. For me it's a fact, but not scientific. But it's wonderfully proven by the scientists, and I would wish that more originally skeptical and simply rational people, like I used to be all my life, get convinced by scientific, clear and simple wordings, not just complicated things, as it could be, simple wordings and simple scientific facts to be leading people into a more constructive, peaceful living in that way. Because we are one in diversity, but we don't live that way. Do you have a solution?
That point is beautifully articulated, and that's exactly where it must come. The logic of this, and I think that Ervin Laszlo is the co-chair of an organization we formed precisely to address this. We call it the World Commission on Global Consciousness and Spirituality, which is recognizing that the technology that I'm indicating in the double bracket, the place of deep connectivity, translated into culture, is deep dialogue where unity and diversity can meet in integrity. So it translates into a political situation, and I think the World Commission and the Club of Budapest and the World Wisdom Council that Ervin has been leading to form is precisely designed to help bring this new lens to culture at large, to people, in terms of learning the skills of dialogue across our worldviews. The violence you point out, where diversity collapses in the ego technology, is because we have not been sufficiently aware that we're using a certain lens when we live that spawns the violence and breakdowns and fragmentations within our worlds and between us. So that how do you bring this integral thinking method into a form that can be educated and raise our youth and help bring our cultures together? That is exactly what we're trying to do.
You ask for simple words.
Just to make them understood, for that one.
Yes, as simple as possible. I'm always trying to think at the end of the day, what is it really that's substantive? What is it that we learned? You know, I keep always asking myself that. And I always try to state it, what is fundamental, from which the other things can be derived. So I suggest to you that what Ashok was saying, that's what I've been talking about this morning, is that there is a fundamental shift in our view of ourselves and of reality. It's not a question now of building something into it that was up till now not sufficient to recognize, such as the role of information. If you have the classical worldview, by classical I mean in the sense that scientists talk about classical, anything that's more than 20 years old in science is classical. So if you have a scientific mainstream worldview and you're just building more information, then you have information here and information over there, and then you have more and more complex and relatively incomprehensible or anomalous phenomena. How could you reformulate your entire concept of what the whole thing is about? And if you are a philosopher, I consider myself a philosopher, professor, better or worse, you ask yourself this question, what is it basically that we can know? And that means going back to a fundamental supposition. A fundamental supposition that in all the great traditions is there, that we lost for the past 300 years, 250 years since Galileo and Newton in the Western world. Namely, that at the heart of reality there is a unified substance or structure or field or something, out of which the complexity, the diversity emerges. And this thing is one, if you like, in that sense. So it's basically a fundamental shift. And this fundamental shift, if you take it in your mind, if you accept this shift, you begin to look at the world in very different ways, a different lens, as Ashok would say, more of a unified global lens. It seems to me that it's the world that strikes me, the knowledge that we have accumulated about the world can be summed up in terms of two key concepts. One is evolution. Everything is changing, moving on and on, at least in a semi-irreversible manner. And the other one is coherence. It's evolving in a coherent way, not entirely randomly. If it was purely randomly, anything could happen, and anything would happen. But there is some coherence to this. So it's evolving in a coherent fashion. Not totally coherent, but in all the chaos there is an underlying coherence, a logic, something. Okay? Now, is this a mere artifact, or is there something in nature that we can assume is responsible for this? I would suggest that there is, and therefore one must look at the world as not from the top down, as this and this and this. This is a physical phenomenon, this is biological phenomenon, this is consciousness phenomenon, this is social, historical phenomenon, and they're all different. But have to see how they generated out of an underlying logic. How they came about. And if you ask yourself this question, I think you must assume that for the world to evolve coherently, you not only need energy, you need memory also. You can simulate complexity, starting with simplicity. You can do it with a computer, but you have to have one element there. The computer must connect all elements with all other elements, otherwise it will fall apart. You must have a constant interconnection between all the elements. Then you can feed in the algorithms, and then new things can occur. But the old is, the new thing is always built on the old. So that the new is somehow a first elaboration of the old. If you do that, you can have ordered complexity arising in the world. So if you simply assume that energy is occurring in empty space, so to speak, if it's just one thing happening, acting on another thing, and there is no memory and no connection, then coherence in evolution would be a miracle, would be understandable. You know, to understand coherent evolution, the coherence of the world, we must think, we must assume that all the elements of the world are fundamentally interconnected, and this interconnection has a permanence aspect, in which is space and time. It's interconnected in space, and it's conserved over time. So that the evolution of the world is a constant, coherent, self-reflecting, a self-constructive process. A constant reciting what there was and adding on the innovation. Nothing new. I think Ashok and other philosophers would tell you that it all has been there since time immemorial for 5,000 years. And even in the 20th century, philosophers like Whitehead, for example, used to do this in their metaphysics very, very clearly. But what's novel now, that science has finally is uncovering a number of phenomenal factors or experiments or observations which show that connection is actually there. You can't ignore it. It's there at the quantum level, it's there on the cosmic level, it's there on the biological level, it's there on the consciousness level, and the social-cultural level. It's there. And also there is something else is there. Whatever happened once, somehow or other doesn't completely disappear. It continues to influence what is coming after that. And all these various elements, you either keep doing ad hoc and adding on, furthermore, little additional hypotheses, and then you get the Ptolemaic picture of epicycles adding to epicycles until your worldview breaks down because it becomes too complex. oh, you see, something in the world is different than what we thought. Space-time, as Einstein thought. I'll come to the moment. Yes.
That sounds very pessimistic because 1,000 years ago we had the Crusades and we're doing it again. Is that the memory of the Crusades? That's your problem. I don't take this. I mean, something else has to happen, so we don't just do the same thing over and over and over.
Well, of course, if this field would purely be memory and nothing else, then there would be just repeating it, or constantly cycling it. But novelty is a constant factor. And the world, the cosmos is dynamic. It's created. It started on a level, whether it's the Big Bang or a bang, it started, and from then on, it complexifies. So we remember the Crusades, but we can build on this memory of the Crusade and do something else, but not randomly, not disconnected, but in a coherent, self-evolving fashion. So I want to make long, I just want to suggest to you that it's not a question of building one or another aspect now into it and say we need a little improved biological theory and improved consciousness theory, etc. I think we may have to do is this fundamental shift, which is going back to the old one, as Ashok was saying, going back to the idea that at the bottom, reality is one. What's emerging is phenomenal diversity. It's constantly evolution, and evolution means not the sameness. Evolution means constantly creative novelty, as Whitehead would say. It's constantly moving in to what there was, but coherently, building on what there was. So, in that case, I think the Einsteinian notion, which was a revolutionary time, from absolute space to relativistic space-time, we need another revolution, where you see relativistic space-time is now physical space-time. Because there is underlying all space and time, there is a constant, basic field. You don't want to call it substance because it sounds materialistic. You don't have good words for it because it's the most basic thing. Everything moves out of it. But the Hindu philosophers call it akasha, and it seems to me it's also a good term. It's the most basic thing. It's the ether, not the mechanistic ether of the 19th century, but it's the fundamental thing out of which all other things emerged. Yes.
I feel it's very important for this basis which you are working on and which lies in the academic field. But then to follow up your very important question and your real concern, if and when this becomes scientific knowledge, mainstream knowledge, the Akashic field working in one, yet and still, how does it translate? Do you have any idea how that would translate into practical reality, political reality, religious reality, so that we can have more and more harmonious and easy world? I think that's quite a good question. So, how do we translate it? I mean, yet there is a lot of work to do to sort of make this, bring this into our common consciousness. But yet, even now, we can start imagining the practicality of it. I think this is following up the work.
Just one word on this, and we go on to the discussion. It's going through the phenomena that Rupert Sheldrake, for example, has been showing. We can interact with each other. Telepathy is not abnormal. Telepathy is probably more normal than our everyday consciousness. Our everyday consciousness is an anomaly in the history of the cosmos. Telepathy is a norm in interacting with each other. If we can recognize that our brain, our bodies, are receiving and sending information, as we are constantly processing information and transforming information, that this interaction between all of us joins us together into a single unified field, a noosphere, for example. Then we are related to each other. And if this transpersonal consciousness that Ken Wilber is talking about, that Gebser is talking about, that Aurobindo is talking about, etc. Moving on to the next level is the perception of being intimately connected. As we heard before this morning, if you know each other, if you have goodwill, if you are emotionally bonded, then you have this close connection. With strangers, it's less evident, you see. So if we feel ourselves related to each other, and develop closer bonds, and we will be closer connected, then we'll create one family. Within a family, we have this bonding. Within the human family, we don't have the bonding. But it's only because of some limitations of thinking. So perhaps this a new worldview, this obsession was started with the simplest possible form. A new worldview would help us overcome this.
I have the feeling that the answer you give is not the answer for the real key question here also in this order. Because I think that the world is in a downward spiral.
You know what?
Downward. I think there's no question about it. And I think the key question could be, are you or are we quick enough to find a strategy for transformation of consciousness on the collective level, to get out of the downward spiral, you have to transform it into practice of conflict, into the practice of medicine, into the practice of management, and we are far away from that. In practice.
Okay, let me just say this is the work of the Club of Budapest. This is here, I assume, of a symposium on science that we're looking at more of the cognitive aspect. But the practical aspect, you're right to raise it. I fully agree. So, but let's continue.
Yeah, I'm very basic. I'm working practical. I'm like a doctor, and I know many other persons who work on the ideas of Ken Wilber. So in my environment, there's a lot of these thoughts, and I came here to get some input, and I heard a lot of speeches, and actually it's not that what really interests me. I know basically the things you say. What I am very keen on is that you interconnect and we interconnect, that you can exchange your ideas, not that everybody make a monologue. That's what I came here for. So I just suggest less a speech and more dialogue. And then as this is interconnected, you must practically.
Well, as often do feel that we are interconnected, we're getting the chance and we're getting more chance to do this. Just to introduce myself, I come from the world of literature and of publishing, and in that position as an editor for a small publishing company in Munich who published esoteric books, basically mostly who presented Indian wisdom, books on Hinduism and on Zen Buddhism also. In that time, in the 70s, 80s especially, I had the privilege to watch this growing movement of especially a young generation being vitally interested in these ideas. And then the book by Fritjof Capra, which most of you will know, that Power of Physics, was published, and it took me a whole year to persuade the publisher to do this book, but finally he was persuaded, and as you all know, it did also become in Germany a cult book as it was in America. And he was one of the first voices who brought together the world of Eastern spiritual wisdom, or the world view, the basic Eastern world view with Western science. And this belief, not coming from science, was praying that it was now Western science which is getting back to these origins, all these things we've been talking about. And I saw even those 2 decades, or 4 decades, not 3 decades now, a growing awareness of these things and of the Akashic field. We can use the word then. It was a totally different worldview which transcended the dualistic way of thinking, which to me was immensely gratifying, and for lots of people I knew. So I do feel a critical mass of people is emerging, and awareness is growing, which may then reach the point, because it is now a better side. I mean, the question is, do we have how much time us when we're together, going off in different directions, to formulate things, principles which schools, especially secondary education, is whether the mind opens up to these things, which is possible to really convert into practice what we're talking about here.
So I'd like to respond to this if I may. It's more than practical. It's more than possible. All of the technology that we need to create schools that are responsive to learning exists. We have a clear and good notion of what learning is. And we also have a historic view of learning, which is very detrimental. This is the view of the collection of information. So our view of the collection of information, the old word information, the one that's data. This is not a useful view of learning. There is a view of training that concerns the gathering of information, learning mathematics, learning physics. That's a kind of training if you look at it historically. If you look at the operational views of learning, they deal with process thinking, they deal with dissonance, they deal with recognition of anomalies, they deal with dialogue, they deal with the dialogue that you're asking for today. The development of community, in which community is the determinant of values through the learning processes. And yes, we're in a downward spiral because we are living in that old model, this historic model of education, where all the very brightest young people would like to leave school. And many of them do. And if you look at the cross-section of who leave school, mostly it's bright children, bright young teenagers who leave school because they cannot fathom the insult of the non-generative use of their time. It's straight away. We know how to do it, we know what to do it, and the question is whether we have the will to do it and the political savvy to do it. And actually, in my experience, I don't think it's an issue of money at all. I think it's an issue of intentionality, of attitude, of willingness for those who call themselves teachers to actually be teachers, as opposed to being something other than teachers, which I won't comment on because it's mixed company. I have to be careful with my language.
May I add another question? We know that Maya calendar in 2012. It means we have 8 years time. And the strategy should be built up on this time frame. And if you don't have anyone, let's have that once in a seminar, if you don't have a content consciousness, we are lost.
Question for us?
Thank you. My name is Weiner. I wanted to comment, I think now, I wanted to just make a simple comment at the beginning to the discourse of Ashok, but I think it answers some of the other questions as well. We're talking about shifting consciousness, shifting of one way of thinking to another way of thinking, of being, or awareness. We're talking about evolution, and non-coherent evolution not being chaotic. The underlying element that would also lead to practical application is purpose, is direction. If I have evolution, or if I have change without direction, I have chaos. If I give direction to it, I get evolution. And in the spiritual sciences, or even religion, that's usually denotes purpose, or sometimes as divine will or whatever. But that direction, if we give that to this consciousness change, we have an application. We can develop the application. If we create direction as a thought form, we create direction to this thinking, and that as an element to it, we have a practical tool to go forward and make it real.
Yeah, I just had a comment.
You speak loud.
Yeah, I would like it if we don't focus too much on fear and on where we shouldn't be headed, and rather, because we're still at the beginning of the weekend as well, and rather just focus on where we can go. And I would like to know with what questions everyone's sitting here. So what the focus of the audience is, and what the focus and the questions of you are, so what we want of each other. Because I'm sort of lost in this discussion.
Okay, Anna, say that.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow up very briefly on the question of application, I think, and where these ideas go. Just briefly, we're really talking about social progress here, and what's been applications can be made in the practical areas in society. And as always, I think as Ervin knows, perhaps as well as anyone, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. And at least in the United States, we've seen a big couple of steps backward lately. 2 steps backward. But, if you look at the long course of history, we see progress. We don't have slavery anymore in most places in the world. And pretty well, we have gender equality in most places in the world. We're gradually seeing changes, and ideas like this, ideas that have to do with the unity of nature, are getting applied, in fact, all over the place, in medical communities, and business communities, and in education. They have to sometimes shake the bushes a little bit to find out just where. They're all over the place, just you're involved. So it's there, the seeds are there, the seeds are growing. And I have a strong belief in a kind of diffusion of knowledge, so that conversations like this one can be seen very erudite, very academic, very abstruse, very abstract, but they, I hate to use the word trickle down, but it's a nice, I don't believe in trickle down economy, but I believe in trickle down ideas. I think conversations we have with other people, communications we have with other people, things we write, there's a whole kind of cascading of ideas that distribute themselves ultimately in society and find their right place and find their right balance. So I'm very optimistic about all that. The thing I'm worried about is the fact that it's a slow process, and I have, as Ervin has and many of us, racked our brains to try to figure out how to accelerate it. Cultural evolution is hard to accelerate, that's a problem. So we've got these people, as you know, in the United States, we just had this election. What can we do to keep them from burning the house down while we're trying to put the pictures up and improve the plumbing and so on? So that's a real serious problem. I think it would take a whole other conference, and if anybody knows a solution, you really should tell us, because we're all trying to figure that out. But that's my pessimistic side, is that, the place is on fire. We've got people that are, anyway, the political thing, we all know that our time is limited in some ways in terms of the world ecology. Short of that, I'm very optimistic in terms of the long view of things, because I see this change going on really all over, and it's out there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I learned one thing last night here, and I would like to apply that to things which were spoken by you. If the universe is a whole, and if there is a universal connection between us all, then in the field of educating people, and I'm a teacher, trust is the possibility to gain this not only feeling of wholeness, but also to make take place very fast. It sometimes needs only a few minutes or even seconds. That's my experience. When I have, for instance, a class of 17-year-olds, they have gone through education in boxes for you know how many years. Yeah, they have learned to separate things. They have learned to be examined. They have learned fear. They have learned that they are separate from teachers, have nothing to do with them. And if you succeed in gaining trust by giving them this fundamental self-confidence, which is the confidence of humankind, or you could say that the whole cosmos, then I think processes of learning can run very fast. And this gives me a lot of hope, I think.
I want to contribute a small thing in this, because I want to ask you, do you teach from experience or do you teach in theory? And
No.
if I look at you, I think you are teaching from experience.
Yes, certainly.
From your own experience. And that's the same answer on the question that you were asking. Like children don't want to learn anymore. Because teachers are teaching from knowledge and not from experience. Like if I look at this very interesting man, he was explaining to me, and I have to say it didn't interest me not that much, because I had a feeling it was teaching from the mind, very intelligent mind, but I didn't experience your experience. And if you teach from experience and you include the knowledge in that, then you have the whole package, and then the arrow is going right to the heart. You can really you vibrate with the knowledge of the information, and then I can feel it in your consciousness. And that's a different way of teaching, I suppose.
Yeah, that's well said. And, I had to go through that experience myself as a professor. Once I came back from India, I'm trained as a logician, and all of my education was in the box. And once I saw the texts that were opening up this space, you read the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is speaking to Arjuna. When I first started teaching these texts, Buddha is speaking from here. The great Descartes was breaking out of the box. But I saw that I was educated in the box. Now, I think the question that's being asked is exactly the right question. We are in a deep crisis at this point in our culture.
We are in a crisis of lacking experience.
Exactly.
There's so much in mind.
Exactly.
We lack experience.
Exactly. And that's the point. And my point was precisely that if we keep thinking in this technology, which has been seen for millennia to be the source of the breakdown crisis, and don't realize that it's not an overnight thing. This has been going on for millennia. That's the point I'm making. All of our great teachings, I would say, get out of the box, and there's a different mind process that will bring us into that experiential. And that was the point I was making, really.
Yeah, okay,
I would like to comment on this, because I think as we're sitting here, we're privileged, because we're open to new aspects of science. And what we tell each other, perhaps for most of us, is not new. But we need our support, because when we talk to other people, then you're very reluctant to accept what we say. What I said this morning, that we can have consciousness with cognition and with emotion and with memories without our brain. What I'm talking about. What about our medical world? When we see that the aspects of consciousness are interconnected with everybody else. When our awakened consciousness is just a small part of our consciousness. And that perhaps is not new for the people sitting here. But it is so new for many people that we have to realize teach medical students. I think it's a slow process. But we have to realize again and again that it is different as we thought about. When we look for a body, for instance, when we realize that there are 500,000 cells replaced each second. And we have a new body each year. And also 99% of our molecules and atoms are being replaced each year. Where does the continuity of our body comes from? It's like what Rupert said over this morning. It's like building a house each year, and you need an architect for it. But the body is replaced each second. You need an architect for it. And how can we have the communication of our cells and in our systems? It is different as we thought. So I think when we continue to think over and over again what we're trying to say, it's a revolution. Because everything is connected with each other, and the consciousness of us. So when we start to be interconnected here, we will connect other people as well.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that for a sec. The question that you asked about the practical application is one step beyond what was the immediate objective of this particular meeting. Okay, but it is part of it, but only one step beyond. Namely, there is an immediate agenda and there is a secondary agenda. The immediate agenda is to see if there is a more unified concept of the world, including the physical, the biological, and the consciousness, mental aspects, if it is possible, and if you'll accept excuse the simile, if it's scientifically kosher, if it's accepted. If you could get across to the scientific community, which I think most of us know is extremely conservative. Few things are more conservative than the university. Probably Vatican may be the only one. Or the White House. But if you can get across through a group of people who are coming and establish reputations in different fields of science, and you're studying biology and biology and chaos theory, etc., education and so on, that there is a possibility of creating a more unified, scientifically acceptable view of the world. Okay? That has an intrinsic value because it's more meaningful. It recovers our lost sense of being in a meaningful universe. And it has the secondary consequence that if a scientific community, even if it's a small group within a scientific community, would start saying, okay, there is a more unified conception possible in which connections between us are real. We are not bounded by our skin, but we have this continuity, through our minds, through our consciousness, through information. If that gets around, then people would begin to understand that what they themselves have felt, because the majority of people feel this, people are not stupid, they feel this. But there is no way that they think that the science will give them, will justify this. They say, no, science is completely different. In terms of the scientific worldview, this is nonsense. So if we could show that in science also this sense of connection has a justification, I think there would be people's natural instinct of solidarity, of empathy, of relatedness, that is not limited to families, sometimes to enterprises, sometimes to community, but very seldom beyond the boundaries of one's own nation. This might be growth, so it has a secondary effect. There is this secondary agenda, and we are very much focused on that particular agenda in the framework of the Club of Budapest usually are. And in 2 weeks' time, we are meeting of the World Wisdom Council where we are taking just particularly that aspect. How could we accelerate, or pulling out of the negative spiral, moving over into the positive, direction. But at the present time, this particular meeting, my hope for it was and is, that it would give increasing legitimacy to a unified concept of the world.
which would then have a good effect.
Since I was guilty of that question, may I add one small question to help you in this direction you're wanting? Because it's this thing which we have an IONS group, local IONS group. I was encouraged to say this here. Noetic Science Institute is big in America, we're very small here, but we also have people here who are holistic attitudes. And in this group we do think practical and at the same time try to go into it in a non-scientific, meditative way. And one in our group has one way which could help in your way. There's a wonderful lady who is a household woman. How do you call this? Hausfrau. Housewife, thank you. And she found out her children learns better if they learn to meditate. And she was so successful, she's now touring all of Europe, not only in her area, teaching 7-year-old children 15 minutes meditations. And those children are proven to get ready to be open. Open also for holistic concepts like the one you luckily want to propagate, and are fully behind you in this purpose, of course. So this might help you, and it's a practical thing, no? And it would still further your basic idea. Could that be acceptable? That we propagate this kind of movement?
We had a member of the club from the very beginning. She's called Margaret Smith-White. I don't know if she's still alive. She was in the upper 80s, already 10 years ago. And a wonderful English lady who did precisely that. Taught children to meditate, and then she had them made sketches, pictures, before that and after that. And you could see the difference. It was incredible. The pictures became more harmonious, related together after the experience of meditation. So I'm a great believer in the alternate, on the deeper states of consciousness from children upwards. Yes, please, you have a better question. But loud. Yeah.
I think I'm convinced that in every profession we are all capable to do these things, that think and act as a wholeness. It is every good teacher, every good pedagogue, every good kindergarten, it is for the small children, every good medical doctor is a person who is thinking in wholeness. As from your lecture in the morning, if you are dealing with people who are at a near-death experience and so on, so you have to experience it and you have to help people to go through this experience. It means that you have to live and keep the experience and gain the experience. That's one thing which I am convinced that every one of us is able to do like this. The other thing, it turned out, if she asked your question, that in every profession we should work on the techniques which are communicated, capable and cooperable with the science today, this academic science, and the whole of science. For instance, in medical affairs. Of course, in the classical medical process, we know that the classical medical process is dealing with biochemical means, and the body will be treated by biochemical processing. But in this whole thing, what is new for the healing, the body can be also treated by informational means. The question is only that not in all cases. We have to work out the technique in which case is necessary. The biochemical way, in which case is only sufficient. The informational way, and in which case it's necessary to combine both, because it would be actually the wholeness, and it would be actually a wholeness in meditation, in healing. So that would be the practical way to work out in every profession, how we should proceed in the healing, for instance, to combine with this scientific healing work, and they are method. I'm also here in this field. I can offer practical, but I do not want to go into details now because it's not a question. But I can also offer techniques, plenty of, not only one, but many of techniques which are sufficient and which are very effective to treat special cases, but of course not in all cases, because if you are lying on the desk, then you need biochemical things. So it's all information is very important, and information is first, and information has a tremendous effect, but in some cases it's not sufficient. So therefore, is science, the mainstream science is there, and we have to combine, and we have to reach the level that to be able to cooperate and to have a conversation with the mainstream science. And I believe that this particular way of thinking here is therefore there, that the scientists who are here present, they are a further step forward in the communication with the mainstream science, that actually the mainstream science accept all these new holistic concepts. And that will be, I think, the solution.
I have a suggestion. I don't